Hello, I'm Sophia Lou and welcome to my channel.
Hi guys and welcome to Sketchbook Sunday. This week we're going to be discussing the topic of fine art versus illustration. As always, the poll for next week's topic is in the top right hand corner, so be sure to check that out and vote for your favourite poll. For now, we've got our sketchbook, which is a Moleskine Art Plus sketchbook. I'll be doing a review of this when I finished. As you can see, I have very little pages left and I'll be doing a review of this when it is full. I'm just going to be sketching a very small illustration today and also be explaining the topic of fine art versus illustration, hopefully to answer some questions that you guys have been asking. So for now, let's grab your sketchbooks and let's discuss. Okay, let's just start this video by saying I have tried to film this video several times. And the reason why I've tried to film this video several times instead of it being a nice relaxed session is because it's very difficult for me to explain the difference between fine art and illustration. I am not a fine artist. I would call myself an illustrator. And the reason why I would call myself an illustrator is because of what I'm aiming towards. I'm aiming towards doing children's storybooks, so I would call myself an illustrator. I want to do commercial work, so I would call myself an illustrator. Whereas people would say that fine artists are working to only please themselves as a client and they're using their work as an interpretation, whereas an illustrator, they are working more towards a client. This is kind of, in a way, it's not true. I have seen illustrators become fine artists and fine artists become illustrators. There are pieces of work out there that were illustrations at the time and now have become pieces of fine art. Like, I would probably use Alphonse Mucha as a huge thing, just because all of his work was commercial, so therefore you would call him an illustrator. But a lot of his stuff now is considered fine art. What's the difference? And here's the thing, I couldn't tell you the difference. I can't give you a clear depiction of if you want to do this, you need to be a fine artist. If you want to do this, you should be an illustrator. Personally, if you are looking at doing more commercial work, I will tell you, go and do an illustration course. They will teach you more on that illustration course on the sort of like the commercial side of it, like working for a client, working for a brief, working for a deadline, this, that and the other. And while fine artists do actually do clientele work, they're more than likely to work for themselves than they are for a client. Now, as an illustrator, you can work for yourself as a client, but you have deadlines to work towards and you do have X, Y, and Z to work towards. While illustrators can become fine artists and vice versa, the bottom line is, in order to do more commercialized work, you're best off taking an illustration course. Now, before you take any course and before you take any advice from any artist, please make sure you do your research beforehand. I am not saying that if you want to do commercial work, you should do this, X, Y, and Z. If you want to do this, you should X, Y, and Z, because the matter of the fact is I can only speak from an illustrator's point of view. From a person who does illustration, this is the way that I can point you forward. While a piece from an illustrator can be interpreted and can be looked at in different ways to interpret the piece, so to speak. For example, if I was to draw a picture of envy, I would use lots of greens. I would do something to show someone being envious. Whereas a fine artist would go, okay, what does envy mean to me? What can I put? What colours can I use? While an illustrator is showing envy, a fine artist interprets envy, if that makes any sense. Even though the illustrator is interpreting envy and is showing what envy is, a fine artist will pick apart, and it's kind of like if a client was to ask you, okay, we're doing the 7 deadly sins, but we're doing it for people in our everyday lives. and we want to depict the 7 deadly sins of our daily lives. Can you do that for us? That is a depiction of what a client would like. And they may say the 7 deadly sins of working in an office. What's your wrath? What's your envy? What's your lust? Like all stuff like this, that it is something that a client would ask you to do. And while it is up to you to interpret the brief, it is up to the client what piece finally goes towards that final product. Whereas a fine artist, pretty much most of the time, you won't be asked by a client to do certain things. While fine artists are asked to do commercial work, they're not tend to be set like such a strict brief. Tends to be with illustration, you are paid to bring an idea to life. Whereas fine art, you're paid for your ideas. You're paid for your interpretation. Whereas illustrator, you're kind of working for a client. It's very difficult for me to explain because there isn't an easy explanation. Because fine artists can do illustration, because illustrators can do fine art, it's very difficult for me to depict between the two. So I'm not saying this is the be all end all, because there isn't be all end all, there isn't a way. I know people who have gone from one course to another. I know that these are different things that people have done and people are doing. I'm rambling now, I do apologise. There isn't much artwork going on in this video, but it's because this topic is just such a difficult topic for me to explain. And I've tried filming this several times so that I can make sure that I'm not going to end up like hurting anyone's feelings or say something incorrect, because I don't want to misinform people. Bear in mind, I've done like a lot of research behind this, because when I first started looking at university courses, I didn't know whether or not I wanted to do fine art or whether or not I wanted to do illustration. Now, a lot of the time, people will say to me, but hang on a minute, isn't some of the stuff that you're doing interpreted as fine art? And I would say, yes. And a lot of fine art is interpreted as illustration. It's so difficult to show the difference between the two, because sometimes there isn't a difference between the two. I really hope that kind of makes sense. If you are looking at doing a university course or looking at higher education to learn a little bit more about what you want to do, like, the only way I can explain it is when I was at university, the briefs that we were set, while they were loose, they were always set to a client in their idea of what they wanted. Like, we had to illustrate idioms. While it was up to us to interpret it, it was always a client that would have the final say in the piece, if that makes any sense. Okay, we like this, but we want you to change this. Whereas pretty much most of the time, a fine artist will not be told that, because it's up to the fine artist to interpret the piece. Yet again, art is subjective. Everyone's going to have their own opinion, and everyone is right to have their own opinion when it comes to art. I don't like every single piece of art I draw. I don't like every single piece of art I see. But it's a way for you to embrace differences in people's work. Now, it's really difficult, because in my head, fine artists and illustrators are so different, but at the same time so similar. I would say that illustration, while it is there fine artists, it's up to the person to interpret the story. Every person will look at the piece that the fine artist has done and interpret the story differently depending on how the painting or how the drawing makes them feel. Whereas an illustrator, they are drawing the depiction of that story. They are showing you exactly what's happening in that. They're going to draw someone frightened. They're not going to do, yes, the colours are going to help that piece, but they're not going to be there to interpret. If you're going to use emotions in a way someone's going to go, okay, draw me sad. And so an illustrator will draw something that is sad, whereas a fine artist would interpret what sad means. I really hope this helps in some way, shape or form, because it is very difficult for me to turn around and say this is the difference, because quite frankly there isn't that much of a difference. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I'm really sorry that wasn't much drawing in this. It's just that sometimes I find it a little bit difficult to draw and talk at the same time, because it's not always easy to do that. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. If you have done any art during this video, show me your work, tag me on Instagram or Twitter. Have a discussion down below in whether or not you find what the difference is between fine art and illustration. There are hundreds upon hundreds of discussions and arguments online that this discussion could go on forever. But the bottom line in most terms is that illustration is more commercial than fine art. I would say anyone who wants to go to university, anyone who's looking at studying this anywhere, in any way, shape or form, I would probably do a bit of research before you go and do it. Have a look at what other people have to say and whether or not a course would be best suited for what you need. Hope this video has been somewhat helpful, and as always folks, stay creative.